The hangar stretched endlessly before me, its metallic walls gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights that never dimmed. In this place, there was no day or night, only the constant hum of machinery and the echo of footsteps against steel floors. I had been standing here for 3 hours, my scaled hide beginning to ache from maintaining the same position, waiting for Commander Reeves to finish his inspection of the new fleet. My name is Zephyr, though most humans simply call me Dragon or Servant. I am one of the last of the Draconians, a species that once soared through the star-filled void between galaxies. Now, I serve aboard the UES Prometheus, humanity's flagship vessel, my wings clipped not by chains but by something far more insidious: acceptance. The sound of boots against metal drew my attention. Commander Reeves approached, his weathered face bearing the same expression of barely contained impatience that had become as familiar to me as my own reflection. Behind him walked Dr. Elena Vasquez, the ship's xenobiologist, her dark eyes always studying, always analyzing. I had grown accustomed to being observed like a specimen, though something in her gaze felt different from the others. "Dragon," Reeves called out, his voice cutting through the ambient noise of the hangar. "Run diagnostics on Fighters 7 through 12. I want a full report on their combat readiness within the hour." I bowed my head, the motion automatic after years of conditioning. "Yes, Commander." My voice carried the deep, resonant quality of my species, though I had learned to modulate it to appear less threatening to human ears. Even my speech had been domesticated. As Reeves departed with his usual brisk efficiency, Dr. Vasquez lingered. She often did this, staying behind after others left, watching me with those penetrating eyes that seemed to see beyond the surface. Today, however, she approached. "Zephyr," she said, using my actual name, a rarity that always caused something to stir within me. "May I ask you something?" I straightened, my massive frame casting long shadows across the hangar floor. "Of course, Doctor. Do you ever wonder what you might have been if things had been different?" The question struck me like a physical blow. In all my years of service, no human had ever asked me such a thing. They spoke to me of duties, of tasks to be completed, of the proper way to serve. But, to wonder about alternatives, about possibilities that had been severed long ago, this was new territory. I began, then stopped. The honest answer would be dangerous. The honest answer would reveal the thoughts that plagued my quiet moments, the dreams that visited me in the few hours I was allowed to rest. I serve the Federation, Doctor. That is my purpose. She studied me for a long moment, and I felt exposed under her gaze, as if she could see through the carefully constructed facade I had built over the years. "That's not what I asked." Before I could respond, the hangar's communication system crackled to life. "All personnel to stations. We are approaching the Kepler 442 system. Prepare for potential hostile contact." The familiar surge of adrenaline coursed through me as alarms began to sound. This was what I had been trained for, what justified my existence aboard this vessel. In moments of conflict, I was invaluable: my enhanced reflexes, my ability to interface directly with the ship's combat systems, my natural understanding of three-dimensional space combat. These were the times when I felt most like what I once was, rather than what I had become. Dr. Vasquez moved toward the exit, but paused at the threshold. "We'll continue this conversation later, Zephyr. I think it's important." As she disappeared into the corridor, I was left alone with the fighters and the weight of her question. The diagnostic equipment hummed to life under my touch, my clawed fingers dancing across interfaces designed specifically for my physiology. The Federation had been thorough in their integration protocols. Every system aboard the Prometheus could accommodate my unique biology, ensuring maximum efficiency in my servitude. The fighters were in excellent condition, as I had expected. Humanity's engineering had advanced considerably since first contact with my species. Of course, that first contact had not gone well for the Draconians. We had been explorers once, navigators of the cosmic winds, our ships dancing between stars like living things. We had approached Earth with curiosity, hoping to establish contact with a new sentient species. Instead, we had found conquerors. The humans had studied us during those first, tense negotiations. They had marveled at our natural abilities, our integration with technology, our understanding of spatial dynamics that came as naturally to us as breathing. And, when the talks broke down over territorial disputes in the Outer Rim systems, they had been ready. The war lasted only 2 years. It wasn't that humans were better warriors, quite the opposite, in fact. But, they had something we lacked, the willingness to sacrifice anything for victory. While we fought with honor, seeking to minimize casualties and preserve what we could of both civilizations, humanity fought with the cold calculation of a species that had evolved through countless conflicts. They had studied our compassion and used it against us. They had learned our unwillingness to destroy civilian targets and exploited it. And, when the war ended, when the last of our homeworlds surrendered to prevent the genocide of our young, they had offered us a choice: integration into their federation as equals, or extinction. We chose integration. We chose survival. We chose to become what we are now. The diagnostic complete, I transmitted my report to the bridge and began the routine maintenance that would occupy the next few hours. My movements were efficient, practiced, each task completed with the precision expected of me. But Dr. Vasquez's question echoed in my mind, refusing to be silenced. What might I have been? I remembered flying. Not the mechanical flight of human aircraft, but true flight, the sensation of cosmic winds beneath my wings, the joy of dancing between asteroids, the freedom of choosing my own destination. I remembered the songs my people would sing as they traveled, melodies that resonated through space itself, a form of communication and art that humans had never been able to understand. I remembered having a family. Zara had been her name, and our clutch of 3 eggs had been nearing maturation when the surrender came. I had never seen my children hatch, never taught them to fly, never sung them the ancient songs of our people. They had been raised in Federation nurseries, educated in human ways, trained for human service. I had not been permitted contact, it was deemed too disruptive to the integration process. That had been 15 years ago. The maintenance work helped quiet these thoughts, the familiar routine providing a buffer against memories that served no useful purpose. I was adjusting the atmospheric controls on Fighter 9 when I noticed something unusual, a slight variance in the oxygen mixture that shouldn't have been there. Further investigation revealed a hairline crack in the atmospheric processor, invisible to casual inspection but potentially lethal in combat. This was precisely why I was valuable to the Federation. My enhanced senses, products of evolution on a world with an unstable atmosphere, could detect atmospheric irregularities that human instruments might miss until it was too late. I had probably just saved a pilot's life, though they would never know it. The repair would be logged as routine maintenance, another small efficiency in the vast machine of human expansion. As I worked to fix the defect, Dr. Vasquez's question continued to haunt me. What might I have been? The answer was both simple and impossibly complex. I might have been free. I might have been a father. I might have spent my days exploring unknown systems rather than maintaining weapons of conquest. I might have died with honor in the war rather than living with the shame of survival. But these thoughts were dangerous. They led to places I could not afford to go, emotions I could not afford to feel. The Federation's psychological conditioning had been thorough, designed to redirect such feelings into productive channels. When I felt the stirrings of rebellion, I was trained to focus on the alternatives: the extinction of my species, the death of innocent young, the complete erasure of draconian culture. Integration was survival. Service was preservation. These mantras had been drilled into every member of my species who lived through the war. The repair complete, I moved on to the next fighter, then the next. The work was methodical, soothing in its predictability. Each task completed brought me closer to the end of my shift, closer to the few hours of rest that would allow me to recharge for another day of service. But, as I worked, I became aware of a sound, soft, almost inaudible over the ambient noise of the hangar. It took me several minutes to identify it, and, when I did, my hands stopped moving on the controls. Someone was crying. In all my years aboard the Prometheus, I had never heard another being cry in this place. The hangar was a space of efficiency, of purpose, of emotional control. It was not a place for displays of vulnerability or weakness. Yet the sound was unmistakable, quiet, muffled sobs echoing from somewhere among the rows of fighters. I followed the sound, my enhanced hearing guiding me through the maze of aircraft until I found the source. Crouched behind the landing gear of Fighter 15 was a human young, probably barely past the age of majority, wearing the blue uniform of a maintenance technician. His shoulders shook with suppressed sobs, his face buried in his hands. For a moment, I simply stood there, uncertain. My interactions with humans beyond the command structure were limited and carefully regulated. I was not supposed to engage in personal conversations or involve myself in human emotional difficulties. My role was technical support, not counseling. But something about the scene struck me profoundly. Here was a human, a member of the conquering species, displaying the same vulnerability that I felt but could never show. Here was proof that even the victors carried pain. "Are you injured?" I asked softly, my voice carefully modulated to be non-threatening. The young man looked up, startled by my presence. His eyes were red from crying, his face streaked with tears. I could see fear in his expression, not of me specifically, but of being discovered in this moment of weakness. "I'm fine," he said quickly, wiping at his face with the back of his hand. "I'm fine." I remained where I was, not approaching closer but not leaving either. "You do not appear fine." He laughed bitterly at that, a sound that held no humor. "Yeah, well, appearances can be deceiving, can't they?" He studied my face for a moment, then seemed to make some internal decision. "You're the dragon, right? Zephyr?" The use of my name surprised me. Most crew members knew of me but had never bothered to learn what I was called. "Yes. I'm Marcus," he said. "Marcus Chen. I've been working maintenance for about 6 months now." He paused, then added, "I've seen you around, but we've never really talked." "Talking is not typically part of my duties," I replied. "Right. Of course." He seemed to consider something, then asked, "Can I ask you something? Do you ever feel like you're trapped?" The question hit closer to home than he could have known. I chose my words carefully. "In what way?" "In this life. On this ship. In this existence." He gestured broadly at the hangar around us. "I mean, I signed up for the Federation Navy because I thought it would be an adventure, you know? Travel the galaxy, see new worlds, make a difference. But this..." He shook his head. "This isn't what I thought it would be." I found myself genuinely curious about his perspective. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Something more meaningful, I guess. All we do is enforce Federation policy on worlds that don't want us there, strip resources from systems that have been independent for centuries, and call it bringing order to the galaxy." He looked at me directly. "Don't you ever wonder if we're the bad guys?" The question was dangerous territory, the kind of thinking that could lead to charges of sedition if reported. But something in his eyes, something in his obvious pain, made me want to respond honestly. "I wonder many things," I said carefully. "But wondering and acting are different matters." "Yeah, I suppose they are." He leaned back against the fighter's landing gear. "My brother was killed last month on Proxima Centauri. The official report said he died bravely defending a Federation outpost from insurgent attack. But I know the truth. I talked to someone who was there. The insurgents were farmers trying to protect their land from strip mining. They had pitchforks and hunting rifles. We had plasma cannons and orbital support." I felt a familiar ache in my chest, the weight of complicity in actions I could not approve but could not prevent. "I am sorry for your loss." "Are you?" he asked, and there was no accusation in his voice, only genuine curiosity. "Or is that just what you're supposed to say?" I considered his question seriously. "Both, perhaps. I am programmed to offer appropriate responses to human emotional distress. But I am also genuinely sorry that you have experienced loss and that your brother died in circumstances that cause you pain." He nodded slowly. "You know what the worst part is? I sign up for 6 more years. I can't get out even if I want to. The Federation owns me until I'm 28 years old." He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite identify. "I guess that makes us both property of the state, doesn't it?" The parallel he drew was uncomfortable in its accuracy. There are differences, are there? Marcus interrupted. I mean, really? You do what they tell you to do, go where they tell you to go, think what they tell you to think. So do I. The only difference is they call me a citizen and, you, what? An integrated ally? A service auxiliary, I corrected automatically. Right. A service auxiliary. He was quiet for a moment. Do you miss it? Your old life? Again, dangerous territory. But something about this conversation, about this moment of shared vulnerability, made truth feel necessary. Yes, I said simply. What was it like? Before? I found myself describing things I had not spoken of in years, the feeling of flight through open space, the complex social structures of draconian society, the art forms that had been lost in the integration process. Marcus listened intently, occasionally asking questions, never judging or dismissing. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "It sounds beautiful." It sounds free. It was. So why did you surrender? I mean, your people were incredible warriors from what I've heard. You could have kept fighting. Because fighting meant the death of our young. The humans, your people made it clear that continued resistance would result in the complete extermination of our species. We chose survival over honor. Marcus absorbed this. And, now you're helping us do the same thing to other species. The observation cut deeper than I had expected. Yes. Doesn't that bother you? Every day, I admitted, the words slipping out before I could stop them. But, the alternative is the extinction of my people. Those who survived, who integrated, who serve, we are all that remains of draconian civilization. Our service ensures our species continues to exist. Even if what exists isn't really you anymore? I had no answer for that question. It struck too close to the fears I carried in the deepest parts of my mind, the terror that in choosing survival, we had chosen a form of living death. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in our own thoughts. The routine sounds of the hangar continued around us, the hum of machinery, the distant clatter of maintenance work, the occasional announcement over the communication system. Normal sounds, everyday sounds, the background music of our captivity. You know what's funny? Marcus said eventually. I always thought the integrated species were the lucky ones. You get to keep your cultures, your identities, your families. You just have to serve the Federation for a while and, then, you're free to live however you want. I couldn't help but laugh, though there was no humor in the sound. Is that what they teach in human schools? Yeah, basically. The Federation offers partnership and protection to all sentient species willing to contribute to galactic stability and prosperity. That's the official line. The reality is somewhat different. How so? I thought about how to explain the systematic dismantling of everything that made us who we were, the subtle and not-so-subtle pressures to conform to human norms, the separation of families, the prohibition against practicing traditional arts or customs that were deemed incompatible with Federation values. Integration is not temporary, I said finally. There is no after-service for most of us. We serve until we die, and our children serve after us. The promise of eventual freedom is theoretical. Marcus stared at me. That's not what they tell us. No. It would not be good for morale. He was quiet for another long moment, processing this information. So you're slaves. We're all slaves, but you're honest slaves while we're slaves who think we're free. I would not use such inflammatory language, I said carefully. But, it's accurate, isn't it? Before I could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the hangar. Marcus quickly wiped his face again and stood, adopting the posture of a dutiful crew member. I moved away to give him space, returning to my own duties as if nothing had happened. Commander Reeves rounded the corner, his expression as stern as always. Chun. What are you doing here? Your shift ended an hour ago. Sorry, sir. I was just finishing up some diagnostics. I noticed an irregularity in one of the atmospheric processors and wanted to make sure it was properly addressed. Reeves looked between Marcus and me, his eyes narrowing slightly. And you, Dragon? Is there a problem with the maintenance work? No, Commander. Technician Chen identified and corrected a potentially dangerous atmospheric leak. His diligence may have prevented a combat fatality. It was the truth, though not the whole truth. The leak had been my discovery, but Marcus didn't deserve to be disciplined for a moment of human vulnerability. Reeves nodded curtly. Good work, Chen. But, next time, log your overtime properly. Dismissed. Marcus saluted and headed for the exit, but he paused briefly as he passed me. Thank you, he said quietly, just loud enough for me to hear. After he was gone, Reeves remained for a few minutes, inspecting my work and reviewing the maintenance logs. Satisfied with what he found, he prepared to leave, but stopped and looked at me directly. Dragon, you've been aboard this ship for 7 years now. In all that time, you've never given me cause for concern. Your loyalty to the Federation has been exemplary. He paused. I trust it will remain so. The warning was clear, though couched in the language of appreciation. Of course, Commander. I serve the Federation. Good. Continue your duties. As Reeves departed, I was left alone in the hangar once again. The encounter with Marcus had shaken something loose inside me, stirred feelings and thoughts that I had worked hard to suppress. His questions had forced me to confront truths I had been avoiding, to acknowledge the reality of my situation in terms I had been afraid to use. But, perhaps most disturbing was the recognition that Marcus and I were not so different. We were both caught in a system larger than ourselves, both serving purposes we had not chosen, both trapped by circumstances beyond our control. The fact that he was human and I was draconian seemed less important now than our shared sense of entrapment. I completed my remaining duties mechanically, my mind elsewhere. As I worked, I found myself thinking about Dr. Vasquez's question again, but from a new angle. What might I have been? The question assumed a past that was lost, a path that had been closed off. But, what if the real question was different? What might I still become? The thought was dangerous, more dangerous than any rebellion or act of defiance. It suggested the possibility of change, of choice, of a future that was not predetermined by the circumstances of my integration. It suggested that Marcus might be right, that what we had become was not necessarily what we had to remain. As my shift ended and I made my way to my quarters, I carried these thoughts with me like seeds planted in fertile soil. I did not know what might grow from them, but I could no longer pretend they did not exist. The conversation with Marcus had changed something fundamental in how I viewed my situation, my choices, and my future. In the quiet of my small quarters, I allowed myself to really consider Dr. Vasquez's question for the first time. What might I have been? An explorer, a father, a free being making my own choices. And what might I still become? That question remained unanswered, but, for the first time in years, it felt like a question worth asking. Part 2. The weight of truth. 3 days had passed since my encounter with Marcus in the hangar, and the questions raised during our conversation continued to echo in my mind. I had performed my duties with the same efficiency as always, but something had changed in how I experienced each task. Where once there had been acceptance, now there was awareness. Where once there had been routine, now there was choice, even if that choice was simply to comply or to resist in small, invisible ways. Dr. Vasquez had requested my assistance in the xenobiology lab, a common occurrence given my unique physiology and insight into non-human biology. I found her hunched over a microscopic analysis station, studying cellular samples from a newly discovered species in the Kepler 442 system. The beings were silicon-based, unlike the carbon-based lifeforms that dominated known space, and their biology presented fascinating puzzles for human science. Zephyr, she said without looking up, thank you for coming. I need your perspective on these samples. The cellular structure is unlike anything in our databases. I approached the analysis station and examined the data streams flowing across multiple screens. The organisms were indeed remarkable. Their cellular matrices incorporated crystalline structures that appeared to serve both structural and information storage functions. In some ways, they reminded me of the quantum biological interfaces my own people had developed for our spacecraft. They appear to be semi-synthetic, I observed. The crystalline components are too regular, too purposeful to be natural evolution. This species has modified themselves. Dr. Vasquez looked up from her work. Modified themselves? For what purpose? I studied the data more carefully, my enhanced visual processing allowing me to identify patterns that might escape human observation. Enhanced information processing, I believe. The crystal matrices are storing and transmitting data at quantum levels. They have essentially turned their own biology into a distributed computing network. Fascinating. She made notes on her tablet. Could such modifications be reversed? The question caught my attention. It seemed oddly specific, almost personal. Why do you ask? She hesitated for a moment, then seemed to make a decision. Because these aren't the first modified beings we've encountered, are they? Your people underwent extensive biological and psychological modifications during the integration process. I felt a chill run through me. This was dangerous territory, the kind of discussion that could be construed as seditious if overheard. The integration protocols were designed to facilitate peaceful coexistence, I said carefully. That's the official line, yes. Dr. Vasquez closed her tablet and looked at me directly. But I've reviewed the medical files, Zephyr. I know what was done to your people. The neurochemical alterations, the behavioral conditioning, the genetic modifications to your offspring. That's not integration, that's systematic alteration of an entire species. Her words hit me like physical blows. I had known, of course, about the various modifications that had been performed, but hearing them described so clinically, so matter-of-factly, forced me to confront their full scope. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because I think you have a right to know. Because I think your people had a right to know. She paused. And, because I think it's still happening. Before I could ask what she meant, the lab's communication system activated. Dr. Vasquez to the bridge. Priority 1. She sighed and began gathering her materials. We'll continue this later. But, Zephyr, think about what I've said. Think about whether the price of survival has been too high. As she departed, I remained in the lab, staring at the cellular samples from the silicon-based species. They had modified themselves, but, apparently by choice, to enhance their capabilities and expand their potential. My people had been modified as well, but, without choice, to limit our capabilities and constrain our potential. The parallel was uncomfortable, but it raised questions I could no longer avoid. Dr. Vasquez was right, I did have a right to know what had been done to us, and, more importantly, whether it could be undone. I spent the next several hours researching the Federation's medical databases, using my security clearance to access files that were technically within my authorization but clearly not intended for my review. What I found there shook me to my core. The integration process had been far more extensive than I had understood. Every Draconian who survived the war had undergone neurochemical treatments designed to suppress aggressive tendencies and enhance compliance with authority. Our children had been subjected to genetic modifications that altered fundamental aspects of our physiology, including our reproductive cycles, our social bonding mechanisms, and our capacity for independent thought. Most disturbing of all was the discovery that these modifications were ongoing. Every medical examination, every routine treatment, every health maintenance procedure included components designed to reinforce and deepen the changes that had been made to our species. We were not simply serving the Federation, we were being systematically transformed into something else entirely. The realization left me reeling. I had accepted our situation as the price of survival, but survival as what? If the modifications continued, if each generation was further altered, what would remain of the Draconians in 50 years? In 100? I was so absorbed in these thoughts that I nearly missed the soft chime indicating someone's approach to the lab. I quickly closed the medical files and turned to see Marcus entering, carrying a toolkit and wearing a troubled expression. Oh, he said, surprised to find me there. I didn't know anyone was using the lab. I was just supposed to run some routine maintenance on the atmospheric systems. Dr. Vasquez was called away, I explained. I was finishing some analysis for her. Marcus nodded and began setting up his equipment, but I could see the tension in his movements, the careful way he avoided meeting my eyes. Something was wrong. Are you well? I asked. He paused in his work. Define well. You appear distressed. Yeah, well, that's the understatement of the century. He sat heavily on one of the lab stools. I've been doing some research since our conversation. About the integrated species, about Federation policies, about what we're really doing out here. I felt a chill of apprehension. What did you discover? Nothing good. He pulled out his tablet and showed me a series of documents. These are classified reports from the Proxima Centauri operation, the one where my brother died. Want to know what we were really doing there? I examined the files he showed me. They detailed a systematic campaign to relocate the indigenous population of Proxima Centauri B to designated settlement zones while Federation mining operations stripped the planet of rare earth elements. The insurgent attacks that had been described in public reports were actually desperate attempts by the local population to prevent their homes from being destroyed. This is genocide, I said quietly. Yeah, that's what I thought too. Marcus's voice was bitter. And it's not an isolated incident. I found similar reports from dozens of systems. The Federation's peacekeeping operations are actually systematic displacement and resource extraction programs. I felt sick. I had helped plan some of those operations, had provided tactical analysis and technological support for missions that I had believed were legitimate peacekeeping efforts. Instead, I had been complicit in the destruction of entire civilizations. There's more, Marcus continued. I found records about the integration process. About what they did to your people, and what they're planning to do to others. He showed me documents that corroborated and expanded on what I had discovered in the medical files. The integration process was not just about controlling individual species, it was part of a larger plan to create a galactic civilization under complete Federation control, with all non-human species modified to serve specific roles in the hierarchy. Draconians were being transformed into technical specialists and tactical analysts. Other species were being modified for different purposes. The insectoid hive minds were being altered to serve as communications networks, the aquatic cetaceans were being modified for resource extraction operations, the energy-based lumina were being weaponized as living power sources. Each species was being systematically stripped of what made them unique, turned into specialized tools in service of human expansion. This is monstrous, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Yeah. Marcus stared at his tablet. And we're part of it. You, me, everyone on this ship. We're all part of a machine that's destroying entire civilizations and calling it progress. I sat in silence for several minutes, absorbing the full scope of what we had uncovered. The weight of complicity was crushing, not just my own, but the complicity of every being who served the Federation, willingly or otherwise. What do we do? I asked finally. Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. What can we do? We're property, remember? You're a service auxiliary, I'm an indentured citizen. We have about as much power to change anything as these cell samples do. But you're researching this. You're looking for answers. That suggests you think there might be something we can do. He looked at me for a long moment. Maybe. I've been thinking about what you said about your people choosing survival over honor. What if that choice was based on incomplete information? What if survival isn't actually possible under these conditions? Explain. Look at these modification protocols. Look at the timeline. Your people aren't surviving, they're being slowly erased and replaced with something that looks like them but isn't really them anymore. In 3 generations, maybe 4, there won't be anything left that could be called draconian. There will just be tools that happen to have wings. The truth of his observation was undeniable. Survival without identity was not survival at all, it was a prolonged form of extinction. So what are you suggesting? I asked. I'm suggesting that maybe it's time to choose honor over survival. The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. Everything I had been taught, every instinct that had been reinforced through years of conditioning, rebelled against the idea. But, underneath that conditioning, something deeper responded to his words. Resistance would be suicide, I said. For both our species. Would it? Or would it be the only way to actually survive? Marcus leaned forward. Look, I'm not talking about some grand revolution here. I'm not stupid enough to think we can overthrow the Federation. But, maybe we can save something. Maybe we can preserve what's left of who we really are. How? I don't know yet. But, I think it starts with truth. People need to know what's really happening. The other integrated species, the human population, even some of the Federation leadership, they don't know the full scope of what's being done. They've been fed the same lies we have. I considered his words. Knowledge without power to act on it is meaningless. Is it? You and I are having this conversation because we know the truth now. That's already changed something, hasn't it? He was right. The knowledge had changed me, had shifted my perspective in fundamental ways. I could no longer pretend that my service was noble or necessary. I could no longer convince myself that integration was a form of salvation. Dr. Vasquez suspects something, I said. She's been asking questions, investigating the medical protocols. Then, maybe we're not alone in this. Marcus stood and began packing his equipment. Look, I need to think about this more, and so do you. But, I think we're past the point where ignorance is an option. We know what we know, and we have to decide what to do with that knowledge. As he prepared to leave, I called out to him. Marcus, be careful who you talk to about this. The wrong person overhearing could result in serious consequences. I know. But, Zephyr, be careful about not talking to anyone about it. Sometimes the biggest risk is doing nothing at all. After he left, I remained in the lab for another hour, ostensibly completing my analysis but actually trying to process everything I had learned. The cellular samples from the silicon-based species seemed to mock me with their purposeful modifications, their chosen evolution. They had changed themselves to become more than they were. We had been changed to become less than we were. When I finally returned to my quarters, I found a message waiting for me from Dr. Vasquez. It was brief and coded in the kind of medical terminology that would seem innocuous to casual observation. Patient consultation required. Genetic analysis indicates abnormal protein synthesis. Recommend immediate intervention to prevent systemic degradation. Please report to Lab 7 at 0300 hours for detailed examination. Lab 7 was in the restricted section of the ship, accessible only to senior staff and their approved assistants. A meeting there at 0300 hours, during the night shift when corridors would be mostly empty, suggested that Dr. Vasquez wanted to discuss something that required absolute privacy. I spent the remaining hours of my shift in a state of nervous anticipation. The conversation with Marcus had already pushed me far beyond my comfort zone, and now it seemed Dr. Vasquez was prepared to take things even further. I found myself wondering if I was prepared for whatever truth she might reveal. At 0300 hours, I made my way through the dimly lit corridors to Lab 7. The ship operated on a reduced crew during the night shift, and I encountered no one during the journey. Dr. Vasquez was already there when I arrived, along with someone I had not expected to see, Dr. James Wright, the ship's chief medical officer and one of the Federation's leading experts on xenobiology. Zephyr, Dr. Vasquez said as I entered. Thank you for coming. I believe you know Dr. Wright. I nodded cautiously. Dr. Wright had overseen many of my medical examinations over the years, and I had always found him to be professional if somewhat distant. His presence here suggested that whatever Dr. Vasquez wanted to discuss was more serious than I had anticipated. Please, sit, Dr. Wright said, gesturing to a chair. We have some things to discuss that may be disturbing to you, but which we believe you have a right to know. I took the offered seat, my mind racing with possibilities. What is this about? Dr. Vasquez and Dr. Wright exchanged glances, and she seemed to be the designated spokesperson. It's about the medical procedures you've undergone since integration. It's about what was done to your people, and what continues to be done. And it's about whether anything can be done to reverse it. The last part caught my attention immediately. Reverse it? The neurochemical modifications, some of the genetic alterations, they're not necessarily permanent, Dr. Wright explained. The Federation has developed protocols for reversal, though they've never been implemented. Officially, they exist only as a theoretical safeguard against accidental contamination. But, they could be used to undo what was done to the integrated species? I asked. Some of it, yes. Not everything. Some changes have become too deeply embedded in your biology to reverse safely. But, the psychological conditioning, the behavioral modifications, the suppression of certain cognitive functions, these could potentially be undone. I stared at them, hardly daring to believe what I was hearing. Why are you telling me this? Dr. Vasquez leaned forward. Because we think your people deserve a choice. A real choice, based on complete information. The choice that was taken away from you during the integration process. And, because, Dr. Wright added, we think the Federation's current policies represent a fundamental violation of medical ethics. What's being done to the integrated species is a form of systematic abuse, and we can no longer be complicit in it. The magnitude of what they were suggesting began to sink in. You're talking about open rebellion against Federation policy. We're talking about providing medical treatment to patients who need it, Dr. Wright corrected. The reversal protocols exist within Federation medical guidelines. We would simply be applying established procedures. Without authorization from Federation Command, I pointed out. Without their knowledge, Dr. Vasquez agreed. At least initially. By the time they discover what we've done, the process will be irreversible. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process the implications. They were offering me the possibility of recovering aspects of myself that I had thought lost forever. But, they were also asking me to participate in what amounted to medical insurrection against the Federation. What would happen to you if you were discovered? I asked. Court-martial, imprisonment, probably execution for treason, Dr. Wright said matter-of-factly. But, what's happening now is wrong, Zephyr. What's being done to your people, to all the integrated species, is fundamentally evil. At some point, we have to choose between our careers and our consciences. And, what would happen to me? That's harder to predict, Dr. Vasquez admitted. Officially, you would be considered a victim of unauthorized medical experimentation. But, given Federation policies toward defective integrated personnel, the reality might be less forgiving. I understood what she wasn't saying. If I underwent the reversal process and regained my full cognitive and emotional capabilities, I would no longer be the compliant service auxiliary that the Federation expected. I would be seen as a security risk, a potential source of contamination for other integrated beings. How many others know about this? I asked. Currently, just the three of us in this room, Dr. Wright replied. But, if you agree to participate, we would need to bring others into the circle. Some of my medical staff, possibly some of the other integrated personnel who might be candidates for reversal. Others like Marcus Chen? I asked. They looked surprised. You know Technician Chen? Dr. Vasquez asked. We've had some conversations recently. He's been asking similar questions about Federation policies and the true nature of integration. Dr. Wright and Dr. Vasquez exchanged glances again. We've been watching Technician Chen, Dr. Wright admitted. His psychological profile shows significant stress indicators related to moral conflict. We think he might be an ally in this effort. Or he might report us to security if approached incorrectly, Dr. Vasquez added. We need to be very careful about how we proceed. I found myself at a crossroads that I had never anticipated. The choice they were offering was not simply between compliance and resistance, it was between continuing to exist as I was and becoming something closer to what I had once been. It was the difference between survival and life. If I agree to this, I said slowly, what guarantee do I have that the reversal process will work? That I won't be left worse off than I am now? None, Dr. Wright said honestly. The reversal protocols have never been tested on draconians. We would be working from theoretical models and biological extrapolation. There are significant risks involved. Including the risk of death? Yes. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine what it would feel like to remember who I had been before integration, to experience emotions and thoughts without the filter of neurochemical conditioning. It was both terrifying and exhilarating. I need time to consider this, I said finally. Of course, Dr. Vasquez said. But don't take too long. We think there are others who might benefit from this treatment, and the longer we wait, the greater the risk of discovery. As I prepared to leave, Dr. Wright stopped me with a hand on my arm. Zephyr, whatever you decide, thank you for listening. Thank you for trusting us enough to hear what we had to say. I nodded and left the lab, my mind reeling with possibilities and fears. The walk back to my quarters seemed to take forever, each step carrying me further from the certainty of my previous existence and closer to a future that was suddenly, terrifyingly open. In the quiet of my room, I lay on my sleeping platform and stared at the ceiling, trying to understand what I was feeling. For years, my emotions had been muted, controlled, channeled into approved directions. But now, something was stirring beneath that surface, something that felt like hope, but also like terror. Dr. Vasquez's original question echoed in my mind, what might I have been? But now it was joined by a new question, one that seemed even more important, what might I still become? The choice they were offering was not just about medical treatment, it was about identity, about autonomy, about the fundamental question of what it meant to be alive versus what it meant to truly live. And, as I lay there in the darkness, I began to realize that the choice had already been made. I could not continue as I was, knowing what I now knew. I could not serve a system that was systematically erasing entire civilizations while convincing itself it was bringing order to the galaxy. And I could not remain a shadow of what I had once been when the possibility existed to reclaim at least some of what had been taken from me. The risks were enormous. The potential consequences were catastrophic. But, for the first time in years, I felt something that I had almost forgotten existed, the possibility of genuine choice. Tomorrow, I would give Dr. Vasquez and Dr. Wright my answer. Tonight, I would mourn the person I had been forced to become and prepare to discover who I might yet be. Part 3, The Weight of Choice. The reversal process began 3 days later in the deep medical bay, a section of the ship that most crew members never saw. Dr. Wright had assembled a small team of trusted medical personnel, Dr. Sarah Kim, a neurochemist who specialized in xenobiology, Dr. Marcus Reeves, no relation to the commander, a geneticist who had worked on the original integration protocols, and, surprisingly, Chief Petty Officer Amanda Torres, a senior medical technician who, it turned out, had been questioning Federation medical ethics for months. Marcus Chen had also been brought into the group, not as a patient but as a technical specialist who could help monitor and maintain the complex equipment required for the procedure. His face when Dr. Vasquez approached him about joining our small rebellion had apparently been worth seeing. Shock, fear, and relief warring for dominance before settling into grim determination. I never thought anyone else was thinking about this stuff, he had told me during one of our clandestine meetings. I thought I was going crazy, questioning everything I'd been taught. Sanity and madness are relative concepts, I had replied. Perhaps questioning an insane system is the most rational response possible. The medical bay hummed with quiet activity as the team made final preparations. The reversal process would take approximately 18 hours, during which time my body would be subjected to a complex series of neurochemical treatments designed to neutralize the conditioning agents in my system and restore, as much as possible, my original neurological pathways. Dr. Wright had been honest about the risks. The procedure could result in severe neurological damage, complete personality dissolution, or death. But it could also restore cognitive and emotional capabilities that had been suppressed for years, potentially giving me back aspects of myself that I had thought lost forever. Are you ready? Dr. Vasquez asked as I settled onto the medical platform that would be my home for the next day. I do not think anyone can be ready for something like this, I replied. But, I am as prepared as I can be. The first phase involved introducing neutralizing agents that would begin breaking down the conditioning compounds in my bloodstream. Almost immediately, I felt strange sensations, not pain, exactly, but a kind of tingling awareness, as if parts of my mind that had been sleeping were beginning to stir. How do you feel? Dr. Kim asked, monitoring my neurological responses on a bank of screens. Different, I said, struggling to find words for the experience. Like I am remembering how to think thoughts that I had forgotten I was capable of thinking. The process continued in phases, each one designed to address different aspects of the conditioning. As the hours passed, I experienced a gradual but profound shift in how I perceived and processed information. Colors seemed more vivid, sounds more complex, emotions more nuanced. But, with the restoration of my natural cognitive processes came the return of suppressed memories and feelings. I remembered my family with devastating clarity, not just the factual details I had been permitted to retain, but the emotional connections that had been chemically muted. I remembered Zara's laughter, the way she sang the ancient flight songs, the protective tenderness I had felt for our unhatched children. The grief that washed over me was overwhelming. For years, I had known intellectually that I had lost my family, but the emotional impact had been artificially dampened. Now I felt the full weight of that loss, compounded by years of suppressed mourning. The emotional responses are stronger than we anticipated, Dr. Kim observed, noting my vital signs. Should we slow the process? No, I managed to say through the waves of long-delayed grief. This is what it means to be alive. To feel loss completely, not just acknowledge it. As the hours continued, other suppressed aspects of my personality began to emerge. I remembered what it felt like to experience genuine anger, not the carefully controlled irritation that was permitted under conditioning, but the fierce, hot rage of injustice witnessed and powerlessness endured. I remembered pride, not in service to others but in my own accomplishments and identity. I remembered the deep, bone-deep love of flight that had defined so much of who I had been. But, perhaps most disturbing was the gradual realization of how much I had been diminished. The person I was becoming, or rather, the person I was remembering how to be, was so much more complex, so much more capable, so much more alive than what I had been for the past 7 years. The contrast was shocking and heartbreaking. My God, I whispered as another wave of recovered memory washed over me. What have they done to us? Dr. Wright checked my readings and made some adjustments to the treatment protocols. What are you experiencing? I am remembering what it felt like to be myself, I said. Not a pale shadow, not a carefully constructed tool, but myself. And I am understanding, for the first time, how much was taken away. Marcus, who had been quietly monitoring the technical aspects of the procedure, looked up from his displays. Is it working? Are you becoming more like what you were before? Yes, I replied. And it is both wonderful and terrible. Wonderful because I am remembering who I really am, terrible because I am understanding who I was forced to become. The hardest part came during hour 12, when the treatment began addressing the deepest levels of conditioning, the fundamental alterations to my personality structure that had made me compliant, obedient, accepting of circumstances that should have driven me to rebellion. As these modifications were neutralized, I experienced something like a psychological earthquake. Suddenly, I could see my years of service with complete clarity. Every mission I had supported, every order I had followed, every moment of quiet acceptance, all of it was revealed as collaboration with my own oppression and the oppression of others. The weight of complicity was crushing. I helped them, I said, my voice thick with anguish. All these years, I helped them destroy other civilizations, other families, other lives. I thought I was choosing survival, but I was choosing to be their weapon against others like me. Dr. Vasquez took my hand, a gesture that would have been impossible under normal circumstances but felt natural now. You didn't choose anything, Zephyr. Choice requires the capacity for genuine decision-making. That was taken away from you. But now I have that capacity back, I said. Now I can choose. And I can see the full scope of what I've been part of. The guilt was overwhelming, but underneath it was something else, something that felt like awakening. For the first time in years, I was experiencing genuine agency, the ability to look at my situation and decide for myself what it meant and what I wanted to do about it. As the process entered its final phases, I began to feel something else returning: hope. Not the vague optimism that had been programmed into my conditioning to maintain morale, but real hope based on my own assessment of possibilities and my own determination to pursue them. "How do you feel?" Dr. Kim asked as the last of the treatment protocols completed. I considered the question carefully, taking inventory of my mental and emotional state. "I feel like myself," I said finally. "For the first time in 7 years, I feel like myself." The team spent another hour running diagnostics and ensuring that the reversal had been successful without causing dangerous side effects. When they were satisfied that I was stable, Dr. Wright helped me sit up on the medical platform. "Welcome back, Zephyr," he said with a smile. "How does it feel to be free?" "I am not free," I replied, though there was no despair in my voice. "I am still a service auxiliary aboard a Federation vessel, still bound by the same constraints and obligations as before. But now I am myself within those constraints. And that changes everything." Marcus looked confused. "How does that change anything?" "You're still trapped in the same situation. Because now I can choose how to respond to that situation based on who I really am, not who I was forced to become. The circumstances are the same, but I am different. And that difference has power." Over the following weeks, as I adjusted to my restored cognitive and emotional capabilities, I began to understand the full scope of what that difference might mean. I was still required to perform my duties, still subject to orders and regulations, still monitored and controlled. But now I experienced all of this as myself, with my own thoughts and feelings and judgments intact. The change was subtle from the outside. I continued to be efficient, compliant, and reliable. But, on the inside, I was making conscious choices about when to comply, when to resist in small ways, and when to gather information that might prove useful later. More importantly, I was no longer alone. The medical team that had performed my reversal became the nucleus of a small but growing group of people who understood the true nature of what the Federation was doing and were committed to finding ways to resist it. Dr. Vasquez had been right about others being ready for this truth. Over the course of several careful conversations, we identified additional personnel who were experiencing moral conflicts about their roles in Federation operations. Chief Engineer Lisa Park, who had been having nightmares about the mining operations she helped design. Lieutenant Commander Jackson Wells, who had begun questioning the necessity of some of the pacification missions he planned. Even some of the integrated personnel from other species who were showing signs of distress about their situations. The network grew slowly, carefully, with each new member thoroughly vetted before being approached. We called ourselves Nothing, had no formal structure, no written communications. We were simply a group of individuals who had decided that the truth was more important than comfort, and that some lines should not be crossed regardless of the consequences. Our first major success came when Dr. Wright managed to perform reversal procedures on 2 other Draconians serving aboard Federation vessels in our fleet. The process had to be done covertly, during routine medical examinations, but it worked. Within weeks, we had 3 Draconians operating with restored cognitive capabilities across multiple ships. The psychological impact of no longer being alone in this experience was profound. For years, I had been the only member of my species that I had regular contact with, and that contact had been limited to professional interactions. Now, suddenly, I was part of a community again, small and scattered, but real. Through carefully coded communications, we began sharing information about Federation operations, documenting the systematic abuses being perpetrated against integrated species and conquered populations. The picture that emerged was even worse than what Marcus and I had initially uncovered. The Federation was not simply expanding through conquest and integration, it was actively working to eliminate non-human sentience entirely. The modifications being performed on integrated species were designed to gradually reduce them to sophisticated tools, indistinguishable from artificial intelligences in terms of creativity, initiative, and independent thought. Within a few generations, the galaxy would be inhabited by humans and their biological machines, with no other forms of true consciousness remaining. It was genocide on a scale that made historical atrocities look like minor skirmishes. But documenting the problem was only the first step. The real question was what, if anything, could be done about it. The answer came from an unexpected source, the silicon-based species we had encountered in the Kepler 442 system. Follow-up contact had revealed them to be far more sophisticated than initial assessments suggested. They were not just semi-synthetic beings who had modified their biology, they were the descendants of multiple species that had merged their consciousness into a collective network spanning several star systems. More importantly, they were actively resisting Federation expansion. The resistance was subtle, invisible to Federation sensors and intelligence gathering. They had learned to appear primitive and unorganized while actually operating as a highly coordinated network of independent cells. When Federation forces attempted to establish mining operations on their worlds, equipment would malfunction in ways that appeared to be natural phenomena. When cultural integration programs were implemented, the silicon beings would appear to comply while actually feeding false information and maintaining their own communication networks. They had been watching Federation operations for years, documenting everything, waiting for the right moment to act. That moment, it turned out, was now. The silicon beings made contact through Dr. Vasquez, recognizing in our small network of resistors the beginnings of something they had been hoping to find: humans and integrated species working together to oppose Federation policies from within. The message was delivered through a quantum communication burst that bypassed all Federation monitoring systems: we know who you are. We know what you're doing. We want to help. The first face-to-face meeting took place on a supposedly uninhabited moon in a neutral system, during what was officially a geological survey mission. The being who materialized in our temporary shelter was unlike anything in Federation databases, a shimmering, crystalline entity that seemed to exist partially in normal space and partially in dimensions our sensors couldn't detect. "You call me synthesis," it said, its voice emerging from harmonic resonances in its crystal matrix. "I speak for the collective, but I am also an individual. We are what the Federation fears most: proof that consciousness can exist in forms they cannot control or predict." The conversation that followed changed everything we thought we knew about the scope of resistance to Federation expansion. The collective included dozens of species that had either avoided integration or had found ways to reverse it. They had been operating in secret for decades, preserving knowledge and culture that the Federation believed had been eliminated, maintaining communication networks that spanned half the galaxy. "We have been waiting for humans and integrated species to join us," Synthesis explained. "Not because we need your help to resist, we have been doing that successfully for years. But because lasting change must come from within the Federation itself. It must come from people like you, who understand both the system's power and its weaknesses." The plan that emerged from subsequent meetings was audacious in its scope and terrifying in its implications. The collective had been gathering evidence of Federation war crimes for decades, building an airtight case that could be presented to neutral systems and even to sympathetic elements within the Federation itself. But they needed people with access to current Federation operations to provide the final pieces of evidence needed to make the case overwhelming. More importantly, they needed people who could coordinate simultaneous revelations across multiple Federation systems, overwhelming the government's ability to suppress or discredit the information. The reversal process that had restored my cognitive capabilities was just the beginning. Dr. Wright and his team had refined the technique to the point where it could be administered covertly to integrated personnel throughout the Federation fleet. Within months, dozens of modified beings across multiple species had regained their original mental capabilities while continuing to appear compliant to Federation oversight. Each newly awakened individual became a node in a growing network of resistance, gathering information, documenting abuses, preparing for the moment when the truth would finally be revealed to the galaxy at large. But the most important revelation came when we finally made contact with other human resistance groups operating within the Federation military and government. People like Marcus were not as rare as we had thought. There were hundreds of Federation personnel who had become disillusioned with policies they had initially supported, who were ready to act if given the opportunity and support. The network that emerged was unlike anything in the galaxy's history: a multi-species, multi-system conspiracy dedicated not to conquest or power, but to the simple principle that consciousness in all its forms had the right to exist free from artificial constraint. 6 months after my reversal procedure, the network was ready to act. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. On a predetermined date, evidence of Federation war crimes and systematic genocide would be simultaneously released on every major communication network in known space. The documentation was overwhelming: video records, medical files, internal government communications, testimony from thousands of witnesses. But the evidence alone would not be enough. The Federation could potentially suppress or discredit information, no matter how damning. What they could not suppress was the coordinated action of awakened integrated personnel across their entire military and administrative structure. At the same moment the evidence was released, integrated species throughout the Federation would simply stop complying with orders that violated their conscience. Not dramatic rebellion, not violence, not destruction, just the quiet refusal to participate in their own oppression and the oppression of others. The psychological impact would be devastating. The Federation's entire structure was based on the assumption that integrated species were reliable tools, incapable of independent moral judgment. The sudden revelation that this was false, that integrated personnel had been making conscious choices all along, would shatter the ideological foundations of the system. As the appointed day approached, I found myself returning again and again to Dr. Vasquez's original question: what might I have been? Now I knew the answer. I might have been a father, an explorer, a free being making my own choices about my life and my relationships. But I also understood that this question was less important than the one that had grown from it: what might I still become? The answer to that question was still being written. In a few hours, I would find out whether the choice to reclaim my identity had been wisdom or folly, whether the network we had built was strong enough to survive the Federation's response, whether consciousness could triumph over control. But, regardless of the outcome, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: I was no longer the diminished being who had accepted servitude as survival. I was myself again, complete with all the complications and responsibilities that entailed. And that self had chosen to act according to its own values, its own understanding of right and wrong, its own vision of what the galaxy might become. The tears that had given this story its beginning, the tears I had shed in the hangar while Marcus wept beside me, had been tears of recognition. Recognition that we were both trapped in a system that denied our fundamental nature, that demanded we become less than what we were in order to serve purposes we had not chosen. But tears of recognition could become tears of transformation. And transformation, even when it led to uncertainty and danger, was still preferable to the slow death of compliance. In a few hours, the galaxy would discover that the weak selves the Federation had tried to create in all of us had been destroyed, not by others, but by ourselves. And, in destroying those weak selves, we had become something that could not be destroyed by others. We had become free. The revolution began not with violence or dramatic proclamations, but with the simple act of choice. Thousands of integrated beings across hundreds of worlds looked at their orders, considered their consciences, and quietly said, no. And, in that moment, everything changed. Epilogue: the Federation did not collapse overnight. Institutions that vast and powerful never do. But the simultaneous revelation of systematic genocide and the coordinated resistance of integrated personnel created fractures that could not be repaired. Within a year, 17 member systems had withdrawn from the Federation. Within 3 years, the integrated species had been granted genuine autonomy for the first time since their conquest. Within 5 years, reparations programs were in place to help restore what could be restored of destroyed cultures and separated families. I found Zara on the 3rd year, in a rehabilitation facility on New Dracosia where former integrated personnel were learning to reclaim their identities. The reversal process had been refined and perfected, and she had undergone the procedure 6 months before our reunion. We were both different people than we had been before the war, shaped by years of loss and struggle and artificial modification. But we were ourselves again, and that made all the difference. Our children, now adults, chose to undergo the reversal as well. It was harder for them, they had been modified from birth, and the process of reclaiming their original nature was more complex and dangerous. But they survived, and slowly, carefully, our family began to rebuild itself. Marcus left the Federation Navy and became a journalist, documenting the stories of integrated personnel as they reclaimed their identities and their cultures. His brother's death had made him a rebel, but his work in the resistance had made him a bridge between species and systems trying to heal the wounds of decades of conflict. Dr. Vasquez was awarded the Galactic Medal of Medical Ethics for her role in developing the reversal procedures and exposing Federation medical abuse. She accepted the award but donated the prize money to rehabilitation programs for former integrated personnel. "The medal is nice," she told me at the ceremony, "but the real reward is seeing people like you discover who they really are." The Silicon beings, the collective, emerged from secrecy to become mediators and teachers, helping various species learn to communicate and cooperate without the artificial hierarchy that had defined Federation society. Their networked consciousness became a model for new forms of organization that respected both individual identity and collective purpose. Not everything was repaired. Too many people had died, too many cultures had been lost, too much damage had been done for complete healing to be possible. But consciousness had survived, in forms the Federation had never understood and, therefore, could never completely control. The galaxy that emerged from the ruins of Federation hegemony was messier, more chaotic, less efficient. It was also more alive, more creative, more genuinely diverse than anything that had existed before. And, in that new galaxy, the question that had started everything, "What might you have been?" was replaced by a more important one: "What will you choose to become?" For all of us, the answer was still being written.